but welcome everyone. Good evening. Welcome to first seminar in season 4 of the mentoring seminar series. It's good to see everyone's faces, and those of you that don't have your cameras on, if you could turn them on, we'd love to see you. It's nice to see some familiar faces as well as some new ones.
Yeah. And, you know, if you can bear to turn your cameras on for a little while, you can certainly turn them back off again later if you feel the need. So typically we wait till about 6:35, maybe a little bit longer, although this evening we have 5 different women who are going to speak. So we probably shouldn't wait too long so that we can honor them with enough time to actually use it.
Yeah, indeed. And I think we already have, quite a number of, registrants in the room. So why wait? I'm happy to kick it off. I'm excited for us to be kicking off the season with WIP. And for those of you that don't know what that stands for yet, although I imagine you do if you've read the information on our website, but it's work in progress / women in practice. And they are a feminist cooperative, a collaborative of women from various backgrounds, ranging from architectural design, landscape design, fashion design even, but all kind of formally trained in architecture that have an interest in social impact, community-based design work. And while they were off in their independent careers, decided to come together to pursue projects that would allow them to do just that. So I actually came to find WIP in about 2020 when I was pretty newly licensed, and my license was burning a hole in my pocket, and I didn't kind of know what I wanted to do next in my career. And I was seeking inspiration, reimagination, excitement, purpose, all the things that you can, maybe think about as you hit mid-career. And I was introduced to Sierra, who is a member of WIP, and we were connected through my interest in fashion design, actually. Now, that didn't end up being the next phase of my career. It ended up being very different, but we automatically connected, and Sierra reached out to me when WIP was opening one of their first projects, I believe it was, breaking ground in Lower Manhattan, which I'm sure they'll share with you guys all the details of how that came to be. And I know that I've seen a preview of the slides. There's some great images in there. But, Sierra then introduced me to the rest of the ladies in the group. They are a group of 7, 5 of which will be, here with us tonight. And they have their own, ethos and philosophy around the way they practice. And they can speak more to all of their individual backgrounds, experiences, and how they work together far better than I can. So that being said, I leave it up to you guys. I know you have a mantra of no hierarchy to decide who speaks first and who leads the way into who speaks next and how you guys present. So go for it. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Angelique and Anik and Nancy, for the invitation and for organizing this event and all of the events that you organize. We're excited to be here, and we are excited to share about our collaborative practice and community. We're all going to speak, so we'll hand off, but we're going to keep it relatively quick. So if you want to start sharing the slides, we can go through those. We will also all introduce ourselves as individuals, but first I'm going to give a kind of overview of the collaborative and the community. So my name's Lindsay Harkema, and at the end of my speaking, I'll share a little bit more about myself. But first of all, WIP, as already mentioned, stands for Work in Progress and Women in Practice. It acknowledges that we are both a feminist collective and that the structure of how we work together is in progress, not totally figured out, unfinished, and evolving over time. And core to WIP is the intention to empower women as leaders in the discipline of our own practices, our own approaches to design, and counter narratives to conventional practice, and to strengthen our collective influence as collaborators, not competitors, because we feel that the notion of the singular genius architect is patriarchal and outdated. So you can go to the next slide. And I'm going to read this text, but it's the only time that I'll do that. WIP is a shared feminist practice of independent design professionals focused on research and design projects that engage community and the public realm. Founded on feminist principles, WIP supports those who eschew patriarchal conventions and define new narratives of architectural practice through their work. Distinct from a traditional firm built around a singular identity and authorship, WIP is centered around a way of working as an adaptable framework to meet the needs of its projects and collaborators. And you can go to the next slide. So these are the founding. Getting a little echo. These are the founding members of the collaborative, and we combined design expertise and professional experience working in architecture, interiors, landscape and sustainable environments, fashion, public realm planning, and community engagement. And these are the 7 founding members, and we mostly work with this group, but it's not entirely fixed. We've worked in sub-teams, and we've also added collaborators for specific projects. But the 7 of us you see here came together as the original collaborative team because of our past connections through shared work, volunteer, and academic experiences, which are noted in very small text with the colored circles you see at the bottom. And also because we were connected to through the larger WIP community. So next slide. WIP community emerged from conversations that I had with other women designers who were in process of founding their independent design practices during the same time that I was establishing my own. So very similar to the experience that Angelique was just mentioning. There was a consensus from those conversations that some kind of supportive professional group that could provide resource and experience sharing would be mutually beneficial, as well as peer-to-peer mentorship and opportunities for collaboration, and that this could be a way of banding together within and against a discipline that has historically held women back. So in February 2020, just weeks before the pandemic would make an event like this impossible for nearly 2 years, I invited that group and their friends, colleagues, and collaborators over for an informal gathering where we discussed what kind of professional support and collaborations we might want from this group. And a few points about why this is necessary are that typically in architecture firms, women are not promoted as design leaders. They are often managers, technical leads, project architects, rarely supported for novel design ideas. Their perspectives are often undermined or overlooked, and life events such as becoming a parent can be detrimental to their standing in an office. There are exceptions to this, of course, but this is overwhelmingly still the norm. Also, professional advice and resources such as contract templates, sheet sets, even design processes for different project types are treated as if every designer should figure them out for themselves, sometimes available only behind a paywall, like with AIA document and resources. We all benefit when we pay our knowledge and experience forward to enable those around us and after us. Instead of the conventional individualistic and competitive nature of the discipline, couldn't we instead see our peers as enablers and all rise together? The success of a design practice could stem as much, if not more, from its ability to resist norms as from its novelty. You can go to the next slide. So over the next 2 years, we hosted a handful of virtual and then outdoor community gatherings, including practice shares, during which we would invite individuals to share their approaches to design practice over Zoom, very much like this, and other social gatherings, including some of the openings of our public projects. And this past May, shortly after the draft of the Supreme Court opinion that would overturn Roe v. Wade was leaked, we hosted our first community happening, entitled Bodies of Women, a collective making event and shared act of empowerment. This happening took place in Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, close to where most of us or many of us live. And each individual transformed a paper hospital gown, an item that typically evokes vulnerability, into a garment expressing strength and conviction. You can go to the next slide. We used green paint inspired by the green wave of feminist activism that has gained global momentum with recent hard-fought victories for reproductive rights in Latin America, and various stitching, sewing, and wrapping techniques gleaned from practices of garment making and care. We wore them and stood together on the monumental stair of the park in an act of solidarity. This gives a sense of who we are collectively. And now we will each share a little bit more of who we are as individuals. So I'll start. You can go to the next slide. I'm Lindsay Harkema. I'm an architect, educator, and the founder of WIP, and a member of a founding member of WIP Collaborative. My career trajectory that led me here began with several years working in various New York City architecture firms, where I gained experience working on a range of projects, which you see in the right-hand column on the slide, and also noticed and experienced some of the shortcomings of conventional design practice that I mentioned earlier. I was drawn to pursue my own work outside of these offices through various design and research projects, including design competition proposals created with close friends after work, self-initiated research and writing about various aspects of the built environment, and eventually academic work about the architecture in the public realm that continues to inspire and be informed by my teaching career now. And nearly every project I worked on was collaborative, a shared effort with friends, communities, or organizations that were in different ways seeking to contribute to the transformation of the built environment into a more vibrant and equitable environment for everyone. Some have been in partnerships with other collectives, such as Open Architecture Collaborative and Design Advocates, both of which other members of WIP are also involved as leaders and participants. And when I decided to found my own independent practice, it didn't feel right to me to base it entirely on myself. Perhaps a mixture of a desire to continue working collaboratively and for the mutual support and benefit of working with your peers, as well as feelings of imposter syndrome and questioning whether I could do it on my own. At that point, I already had a baby. Now I have two, and traditional architecture career paths seemed even more unfeasible and unappealing than ever. So this was how the idea for WIP came together through many of those conversations with other women. And now I'll pass it along to Abby to share her experience.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm Abby Coover. I am an architectural designer and also adjunct assistant professor at Pratt Institute. In addition to being part of WIP Collaborative, I also am a founding member and board secretary of the nonprofit Design Advocates. I started my own practice pretty soon after graduating from graduate school, because of a bunch of different circumstances that were a mix of professional and personal. And so that was 2008. And I also started teaching at the same time. And since then, so essentially from 2008 to 2018, I had a series of different partnerships. And none of those quite panned out the way I had hoped. And so in 2018, I started my own practice, Overlay Office. And the idea and part of the reason why it's called Overlay Office is to allow flexibility in terms of collaboration with others. So not having, again, kind of the single, architect at the helm, but being flexible in terms of being able to collaborate on different types of projects with peers, with fabricators, with all sorts of different types of people. And the slide here shows kind of a mix of my work. The left-hand column represents residential projects, which is a lot of what I do in Brooklyn, including starting to develop some of my own projects. I just actually completed one this year, my first real one this year. So that was exciting. And then also the center column shows some more commercial projects, which have a lot. I've been trying to focus on working with families and children. So the top space is an autism center in New Jersey. The bottom is a family social club in Tribeca. Those are my two kids. I have three. Those are my two oldest on the nets there. And then Design Advocates is at the center there, which is the nonprofit that I started to do pro bono work with 5 other small architecture practices. And then on the right, showing some kind of more experimental and speculative work that we try to also keep going in the office at all times. So I will pass it on.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Elsa Ponce. Thank you for having us tonight. And I'll start by saying I'm from Mexico, so hence the accent. And I'm also an architect. I'm licensed in New York State and also in Mexico. And I'm currently also pursuing my own projects, my own work. I work as a freelance and independent contractor for design consultancies. I also work in a volunteer-based nonprofit called Open Architecture New York that is focused on connecting pro bono design services with communities in need in New York City. And I also used to work for large offices like 10 Arquitectos and 2x4. Well, large offices, maybe large project, but like medium-sized teams are actually pretty boutique. And I had a very conventional beginning after graduation. I did a very traditional 5-year bachelor's in architecture and urban design in Mexico City. And at that point, the preparation for professional practice was very focused on, like just traditional architecture offices with very traditional delivery methods on very traditional projects. So there was not a lot of alternatives. And upon graduation, most of the students would go into starting their own studios in architecture or working for architecture offices. And when I graduated, it was 2008, beginning of 2009. There were many opportunities. The work market was really bad because of the financial crisis here in US that also hit Mexico very hard. But I had good connections with my professors at that point, and I was able to get a job at 10 Arquitectos. 10 Arquitectos is an office. It's very renowned in Mexico, and it also had an office in New York City. Now it was transferred to one of the partners, but back then I worked for them for 6 years in many different projects, different typologies, for clients that were primarily institutional, governments, and developers. So these were very large projects, but mainly produced by small teams. So I had to learn very, very quickly how to practice in the standards of both countries, not only Mexico, but America. And I stayed there for 6 years. And at some point when I was in New York, I was started to feel that it wasn't really sustainable anymore, because we were working mainly long hours. And as Lindsay mentioned earlier, it didn't feel like it was going to be supportive of any major life events or any, changes that I wanted to do in my life. So I started thinking about pivoting, and I became very interested about working in interdisciplinary environments. And even though architecture can be interdisciplinary, at that point I was only working with engineers, and I wanted to work with designers. I was very curious about the branding world and fashion and industrial design and experience. So I started working with 2x4, and I pivoted to design consultancy just because I wanted to have a fuller breadth of design knowledge and problem solving that really didn't have to do all the way with the physical environment, but more about the ideas and maybe introducing graphic systems and working also on projects that were temporary and would allow me to be more experimental and more imaginative. So I work in design consultancies for about 4 years, and I really enjoy that interdisciplinarity. And at some point I decided that I wanted to do something where I could not only work with other designers, but work with communities and see them as designers, even though they didn't have professional degrees. So that's when I became really interested in working with communities. And since then I've been working on self-initiated proposals with local communities. One of them is domestic workers that are located in Williamsburg, and I'm also expanding that work with delivery workers in the city of New York. And also through the work of Open Architecture Collaborative, I've been able to work with communities, connecting pro bono services and working on different projects ranging from farms to community gardens, and usually small but very impactful, and as well kind of pursuing ways that I can just further my personal interests with architecture residency programs and grant programs with Art OMI. I did one in 2020, and most of the work that I'm doing now is supported by the New York State Council for the Arts, and also by the National Endowment for the Arts in Mexico. And yeah, and now with WIP Collaborative, it's been also an interesting opportunity to keep working with like-minded people, but at the same time thinking about alternatives that would allow me to just prepare for life and changes and be nimble and adaptable. And I don't know if I mentioned that I'm a mom. But I became a mother in 2021, and it's also been, part of all this, and for the future. So I'll pass it on now to Sarah. I believe you're next.
Oh, I think it's me. It's Tanya.
Sorry.
Sarah will go next, maybe.
Switch.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm so excited to see so many faces. Would love to hear from everyone when we get into sort of the conversation part of this. So I think for me, from very early on in my career, before I sort of defined my career as a design career, I was always kind of attracted to this notion of natural systems and human systems and how they coexist in the city. I grew up in a large city. I grew up in Moscow, Russia. And then I moved around different big cities. I lived in Paris, Madrid, and then New York. And so in all of those cities, I was always sort of focusing on finding those bits of nature and trying to understand what would happen if they were reconnected, what that would mean for ecology, for human experience, for human well-being. And at first, my way to explore those concepts that I was interested in was through community engagement. And really just because somehow it came naturally to me that if I want to learn something, I need to like get a lot of people to kind of want to learn about that too, and then we can learn together. And I think that kind of led me to community engagement role. But then, so I've done that through projects like the one you see in the couple of photographs that you see on the slide where I'm pointing at a map, or where you see the VR devices. So those are kind of for my community engagement part of the career, where I got really creative at kind of ways to create sort of immersive environments for people to come together and explore a site or explore an issue, and then be really able to together in a very, again, non-hierarchical way to come up with interesting proposals for those. And so later on, or kind of in parallels with that, I discovered the discipline of landscape architecture and realized that this discipline is really the one that provides the best tools to make a difference within those ideas that I was attracted to. And beyond just providing the best tools, it was also the most fun for me, because I think I naturally was kind of like leaning towards things like advocacy or planning. But I knew that I actually did not like the day-to-day work of those types of organizations. I never liked writing or reading, and just doing, design work came as almost like a solution to a day-to-day challenge of what can I do every day that is continuously fun. And so an important kind of step in my career that really solidified my vector as a landscape designer or landscape architect was starting a job at MNLA, which is a landscape architectural office in New York. That really gave me an opportunity to work on really important projects, large scale projects that really make a difference. Things like protecting Manhattan from flooding, or introducing new greenways, or developing master plans for a campus or a neighborhood that really guides the decision making in the next 10 or 20 years. And so that experience really gave me not just the understanding and desire, but also the real tools. And in addition to that, I think throughout my whole life journey up to this point, I've moved around a lot, and I've been always very, very influenced by the places where I end up being, or even just visiting. Starting with my whole interest in architecture started from visiting a certain location. And I think up until now, up until a few years ago, I've been really focusing on exploring the cities, and that really shaped my interest and experience in kind of dense urban environments. But then I sort of pivoted to exploring natural sites, and that after that came the pivot in my professional interests as well. And so through traveling, but also through volunteering in various mostly wildlife conservation projects, I've really developed an understanding that design tools and design skills can be really needed outside of the cities. That sounds naive, everybody knows that. But for me, it was kind of a new realm. And then also just learning from natural systems works way better if you're actually exposed to those natural systems outside of the city, rather than only learning from the bits and pieces that we can find in the urban environment. And so this is sort of where I am now, where I'm really interested in both extremes. I'm still working within the very dense urban environment of New York City, but I'm also learning from, wild places. I've spent time in certain areas of Colorado, and now I actually split sort of my life between New York City and Wyoming, Montana region. So I'm speaking to you from Bozeman, Montana now. And so learning from, natural systems, naturally occurring plant communities, but also ways people learn how to live side by side with the wild, really kind of started to inform my future and my current and future career interests as well. And also during all of these years, I've still preserved that interest for community engagement, which started me off on this topic. And I try to do as much community engagement work as I can, but also now kind of intermingling that with sort of educational work. So I think whenever I do a project that's around engaging a community, I introduce sort of tools that are also applicable in maybe a school environment. I love incorporating elements for youth, for example, that are kind of semi-classes, semi, you know, thinking about the site and their neighborhoods, etc. But also in my role as an educator, and I'm currently teaching at Montana State University in Bozeman. I think I'm bringing in a lot of the tools that I've developed as part of my community engagement work. So I'm kind of, I feel in my head, both of those leaves kind of together in the same department. I hope my students don't hate me for testing every possible facilitation trick on them this semester. So yeah, and in this slide, you see some of the pictures from my volunteering experience at the bottom right, you know, building dam, a very low tag dam in Colorado to kind of alter the drainage patterns of this landscape to increase a certain type of vegetation that's important for sage grouse, a specific species of the bird. Then to example on the, like in the middle on the left, in the left column, which is, you know, a greenway in the Bronx in New York City, which is trying to feed in this tiny piece of, you know, vegetative buffer into this crazy bikeway, expressway, path combination. So very different kind of scales, but I feel like in my mind, if we're able to fix both the very dense urban and the wild, then we got it. Then the world is okay. So that's kind of where I am now. And I'll pass it on to Sarah now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the MWA team for hosting us. It's great to see you all. And thank you, Angelique, for that wonderful introduction. I'm just always so thrilled about, you know, just everything that can happen with like just being introduced to like one person in that one moment that can change a lot of things. I'm Sarah Gadacki. I'm an architectural and fashion designer and educator. The last part is kind of a new development. I just started teaching this semester at City Tech, teaching a undergraduate foundation studio. So my recent work, some of it that you see here, spans multiple disciplines and is both independent and collaborative. As creative director of my eponymous design atelier for fashion, architectural design, and objects with purpose, also collaborating with teams in architectural and interior design firms of different sizes, and also with smaller teams on pro bono design opportunities. My design trajectory began once I graduated fashion design school after a few years of being a self-taught designer. After that, I made the decision to pursue an architectural education because I was interested in the design of multiple scales and mediums, and I wanted to tap into the potential of empowering individuals who often don't feel seen or heard through design. But I really like the idea of working within fashion architecture that are, you know, very different scales, but also how, you know, the human body is affected and it reacts to, you know, these, you know, clothing and architecture and buildings in different ways. And I was really interested in multiplying this impact by working across different scales. So one pivotal moment that I had early on, you can see an image that illustrates that in the top left, was putting on a fashion show in the last year of architectural school. So I was really doing two theses at the same time. That was not part of the curriculum, but I really did, of course, collaborating, crucial collaborations with others, but the design, styling, overall vision, and also developing a fashion film was, you know, things that went into this fashion show. So, you know, that was really a way that I was able to test this alternative simultaneous way of working while I was still in school and seeing how it would feel if I were to do it post-graduation. So my current work now, it involves with, you know, Sarah Gadacki, it's design and research, including adaptive material research, alternative production processes, And throughout my career, I realized I was in search of alternative ways of working and finding a support through like-minded individuals, similar to what Elsa was mentioning, and also for a lot of the reasons that Lindsay mentioned previously. So being a founding member of WIP Collaborative has been another pivotal moment to me and helped me expand how I think about my practice. And so where I am now, though it's certainly a work in progress and it's in flux itself with a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of moments that everything kind of slots into itself, similar to how this grid is laid out. So if you want to go to the next slide, you could turn the focus back to WIP Collaborative. When we began testing a collaborative work model, we identified our values, which you see here in bullet points, which are an egalitarian and democratic practice, resisting hierarchy, which Angelique mentioned previously. So trusting that everyone's experience and ideas are valuable and can inspire and inform our collective work. Always in progress, very important, that WIP is not fixed, not fully figured out, literally a work in progress. Rethinking norms of practice, including challenging very fixed and static conventions of practice and learning in real time how to do that effectively, which means we share in the uncertainty and messiness of figuring it out together. So also in figuring out how to structure and run WIP Collaborative, we learned a lot from other feminist practices, both contemporary and historical. Just to touch on very few, but Matrix Feminist Design Co-op and MUF. But it's also important to note that feminist practice is not just about advocating for gender equity, but also thinking about it more broadly in the context of the built environment by rethinking the structure of practice, the process of design, and the topics that architects engage in. So, inspired by feminist and collective practice models, we've aimed to visualize and give form to our organizational structure in a way that reinforces its multifaceted nature, which is the diagram you see here on the right. WIP Collaborative's core is the 7 founding members, but we wanted this model to remain flexible and fluid enough to regularly expand and incorporate other individuals and entities for various projects. So that's kind of what you can see on the outer rings. And lastly, while we're always adapting, shape-shifting, and reevaluating how we work, this diagram in itself is a work in practice and continues to take on new iterations as we grow, or kind of as we, every time we do a presentation, there's maybe like one edit that's being done to this diagram. So if you want to go to the next slide, just want to introduce our recent work, which other members will go into detail about some of these shortly. Our work to date is a reflection of our interdisciplinary skills and interests and range from self-initiated research projects to winning design proposals to also commissioned work. And over the past 2+ years of collaborating together, there's been this feedback loop that's been created between these types of projects. So not only do we internally learn and iterate from each project, but opportunities for commissioned or invited competitions have stemmed from self-initiating research, for example. To date, we've completed a range of projects focused on the public realm, including 2 built installations in Manhattan, which you'll see the top, Restorative Ground and Tidal Shift, a multi-phase research initiative into the designing for neurodiversity, the bottom right, bottom left, as well as project visioning and consulting for various scales of architectural practice projects.
And Sierra, sorry to interrupt. So Restorative Ground was the first, right? I think I mistakenly called it Breaking Ground before, and Restorative Ground is still up, right?
I think actually, good question. That's I think this week we actually just got news that this week was when it's finally going to be deinstalled. They kind of did full resurfacing. They loved it so much, so it was up for a long time. But I think this is the last. I don't know if anyone has like an actual day, but if anyone is around.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Square.
yeah, let everyone know where it is so that they can go see it and experience it before it's deinstalled.
Yeah, a corner of King and Hudson, but we'll talk about it a little bit. And if anyone, if you all are not able to see it, then hopefully the pictures don't do justice, but yeah, it's bittersweet. But I think that is kind of it for now. So we'll talk about, Restorative Ground in a few of these. So I'll pass it on to Abby.
Can you go to the next slide?
Sure.
So this is Restorative Ground. So this is our first realized project. which was completed in the summer of 2021. When we started first working together, it was a response to a different architectural competition of sorts, where we were doing some self-initiated research regarding inclusive play for neurodiverse populations. And that project didn't work out, but we kind of evolved that research into this project. This was a call for proposals from the Urban Design Forum. It was a competition called Care for Hudson Square. And, the idea was to kind of look at a variation on a street seat type installation that could kind of welcome everybody back into the neighborhood as things started opening up post-COVID. And so this was our proposal, which won the competition, which was amazing and a kind of great way to kick off our built work. And this is an installation. It's made of, I think, 33 8-foot by 8-foot squares. So the idea originally was that it potentially could move to different sites, but now it's been up much longer than they thought, and it looks like that probably won't happen. But that also kind of became part of the fabrication process as well. And you can see here in this overview, just the idea was to kind of look at this idea of inclusive play in different types of zones across the length of the project. So you'll see as we scroll through the images, we kind of had a series of calm zones, a series of more focused zones. So here you can see more focused area. This is a calm zone here, everybody relaxing. In the previous slide, you could see there is a table. So areas of focus for, here on the left, for eating or working or talking, areas that are also then more active. There's lots of children playing on the installation, skateboarders using it. We were really very happy to kind of see the wide range of activities that have happened here across the time that it's been installed. We also looked at different materials and textures to delineate these different types of zones, but also to create different types of experiences across the length of the project. If you go to the last slide, you can see this kind of calm, relaxing zone, whereas, right over here, some children might be playing at the same time. So the idea was to really activate the overall space in different ways for all types of ages and abilities, and different times of the day, different times of the year. And yeah, that's the basic gist of this project. So I will pass it on. Title shift.
I'll be walking you through title shift, and this is a site-specific temporary installation commissioned this past summer by the Shed, cultural institution in Hudson Yards, and it's also our second built project. In last summer, we were approached by the client around mid-May, and they approached to us and asked us if we were interested in having a conversation about activating the plaza for their summer programming. And they mentioned that the opening was planned for mid-July, and it was a little crazy because it was only 2 months from mid-May to mid-July. Nonetheless, we wanted to participate. We wanted to take that risk and at least, give them a proposal. At that point, they weren't sure how much funding they had or what budget to allocate and the timing and the details on fabrication. So we help them to figure out that part of the project, almost like a pre-design feasibility study. And then when they decided to go ahead with it, we actually worked very fast in concepting, designing, fabricating, and installing this in a little above 2 months, but I would say 2 months. And this activation, like I said, was part of their summing programming, which was called Summer Sway. Summer Sway involved a series of dance parties led by renowned DJs and choreographers. And the whole program was inspired by Black social dance. Can we go to the next, please? The installation, as is site specific, was inspired by the facade of the shed, which was designed by Diller Scoffidio and Renfro. And we designed a partie diagram and started to play with the angles, mimicking this angular diagrid that is present in the facade, kind of like trying to tie the proposal to its side, which is very vast and very monumental, as some of you who have been in Hudson Yards can identify. So we wanted to kind of like have some sort of contrast to this, and instead trying to play with a smaller scale that was in a higher degree of relationship with the human body, and that could support the body through inclined planes, step surfaces for sitting, lounging, performing, playing, and be very non-prescriptive about it in a similar way that we did restorative ground. Can we go to the next, please? The design in this case is not a continuous groundscape, but by just playing with these shapes, we decided to kind of like explode that diagram. So we have some negative space created by the plaza, which is actually a very accessible space that anybody on a wheelchair or with a stroller can access. But then we draw an implied oval, which suggests, again, the idea of a communal space in the center. These materials are sustainable as well. We introduce OSB, which is the material that you've probably seen in building sites for fences and protection. Is an outdoor rated material made from compressed wood strands, and is sustainable because it actually uses almost 90% of the trees, and the trees that is made of are trees that can grow very quickly. And we also use a rubber surface that is called Nike grind, and Nike grind is made out of rubber of actual shoes and manufacturing waste. So it's all grinded and then made into a rubber surface. The blue and green colors and undulating forms of the project are celebrations of movement and action on the plaza. And again, the green color, like in our WIP community happening, is an expression of solidarity with the green wave of feminist activism. And this space, sadly, is not there anymore. It was deinstalled, but we were so fortunate for 6 weeks. We all went at least once or twice to just like be part of the dance parties or in the weekdays. And it was amazing to actually witness all the different ways in which people were engaging with the structure, and also people just like from a very diverse community, different backgrounds, ages, some tourists, some locals, neighbors, etc. And just to add some more detail on it, we work with Conduit for the fabrication. It's a local fabricator based in Long Island City, and the installation and maintenance was by the Shed, who has their own scenics crew. And yeah, we were sad to see this go, but hope
So was I.
Yeah, we actually have a lot of documentation, and like photos and videos are great to kind of like keep exploring on how this was used in many different ways, and just like to kind of like keep adding to our research on public space. So
I'm actually just curious, by a show of hands, of This is kind of our local based community. I know we have people tuning in from actually even, Montana and across the country, but just a show of hands, how many people have actually had the opportunity to experience this or restorative ground, maybe not knowing who designed it or, what it was about, but stumbled upon it while in the city? I'm just curious. Anybody? You can use the raise hand kind of feature on. I guess I'm not seeing any. Wow, no. Okay. Well, we'll have to do a better job at letting you guys know when these things are going on. But yeah, they're definitely worth experiencing in person.
Definitely. I mean, we can always share some photos, but yeah, we have tons. And now I'll pass it on to Sonia to talk about neurodiversity.
Yeah, so this is the last project we're going to talk about in this kind of presentation forum. It's a research project, and it builds on everything that was said about our design project. So it really builds on kind of the concepts and ideas that we started to uncover through the design work, but we're really looking for ways to make it a little bit more comprehensive and try to get deeper in our understanding of some of the ideas about how those different spaces are used. And kind of going back to this original idea that Abby mentioned of inclusive design. It's a research project, it's a collaboration again. So on top of WIP Collaborative, it's also collaborating with a larger group. We are doing this together with Verona Carpenter Architects and also Sasha Topolnitska, as well as a number of community-based partners. You see their logos at the bottom of this page, but they're the Center for Independence of the Disabled, Bronx Independent Living Services, as well as Include NYC. And it's also in partnership and initiated by the Design Trust for Public Space. So the premise of this research project is really that, again, kind of coming from our design experience, is that public space is really vital to health equity. And by health equity, we mean that everyone has the same access to resources to support their well-being. So the concept here is that access to public space is necessary not only for physical health, so things like promoting movement, exercise, play, being outdoors, but also mental health, things like release and social connection, as well as community health, interaction, support, being able to have intergenerational contact. We can go to the next one. So while we in the design world already have guidelines, even though they're not fully implemented everywhere in the world by no means, but we do have guidelines for physical accessibility, which makes it possible for people with physical disabilities to access public space and enjoy all of the functions of the public space that I mentioned before. Those with invisible disabilities are often not accounted for in kind of the design decisions. And as a result, the public space is often either uncomfortable or completely inaccessible to certain populations. So in this project, we're using a couple of concepts related to invisible disabilities that can kind of help us maybe change that. And so one of the concepts is neurodiversity, which became part of the title of this project, the neurodiversity. So neurodiversity is both individual differences in how our brains function, and this is a result of normal variations within the population, but also it can mean a range of conditions that can be diagnosed or not diagnosed, such as autism, ADHD, learning differences, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And then another important concept, which we're exploring here in this slide, which is our kind of the beginnings of our visual research, which is sensory sensitivity. So things like being under-responsive to sensory processing or over-responsive. And so while all of this range of conditions and variations is very expensive. So design criteria may be very different for each of those conditions and variations. And so our kind of hypothesis is that creating choice in the public realm may be really a solution that would allow each person, depending on their, where they are within that variation, to kind of find a space that will fit their needs. And let's go to the next one. And this will be our last slide. So as part of this project, which we're on the beginning, so unfortunately we can't share the results yet, but we're very excited to get on, kind of start that process. We're going to look at 3 public space typologies through that lens, the lens of neurodiversity and accessibility. So we're looking at playgrounds, streets, and small parks, so a variety of, existing urban conditions. We're going to first kind of do what we call sensory audit, so analyze whether those spaces are already accessible or completely inaccessible to people with sensory sensitivity. And then importantly, prototype in a way a little bit similar to what you've seen in our design project, prototype some solutions. And the key there is that we're prototyping them not just by ourselves, but in partnership with these organizations and self-advocates that can be really part of this kind of co-creative process, developing the new solutions to make those urban typologies more accessible. And then finally, kind of the final goal of this project is to create a series of guidelines similar to physical accessibility guidelines, but this time focusing on invisible disabilities. And hopefully they can start to kind of change that situation where those where invisible disabilities are overlooked in the design process. And so again, excited to kind of get started on that, and hopefully our design endeavors and our research endeavors can feed each other and go in parallel. And I think this was the overview of our shared practice, where we got so far as a collaborative. And I think with this, I'll pass it to whoever is going to, open it up for the conversation, or I'll just open it up for the conversation. And I think Sarah will sort of moderate the questions, and we'll stop talking now.
Yeah. No, it was great to hear from all of you. Yeah, I kind of, in preparation for this discussion portion, I've encouraged everyone to please, one, turn your cameras on, and two, if you have questions, by all means, put them in the chat and raise your hands. I feel like, there are probably, different questions for each of you, since you, have slightly different, focus and slightly different backgrounds, and possibly some questions that are for the entire group. I know Anik was wondering, Lindsay, where do you teach? I know you guys are all educators, and so a bit more about where and what you teach. I know you guys put where you taught, but what you all teach would be good to know.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't mention it. I know some others did mention, but I'm an adjunct associate professor at City College of New York. I also teach at Barnard College one semester each year. And interestingly, my teaching is somewhat collaborative, especially this semester as well. Another one of the members of WIP Collaborative, Bryony Roberts, who teaches at Columbia GSAP, she and myself and another professor at Syracuse, Lori Brown, who's a very accomplished architect and has done extensive work about reproductive rights in the built environment. We are collaboratively teaching studios about abortion and reproductive justice. So we've kind of put our heads together a little bit and combined also our networks to create a really kind of amazing series of guest lectures from care providers to creative practitioners to reproductive justice experts. And I have to say, it's similar to the collaborative design team, a collaborative sort of teaching team where you can share ideas, share resources, and eventually kind of pool our student work together to hopefully become a kind of broader body of research and work on this topic. Has been really incredible. So I hope that we continue to kind of collaborate through teaching like this as well. I don't know if anyone else didn't say where they teach, if you want to jump in.
Or what they teach, yeah.
Or what, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't say because I feel like I'm still like processing the fact that as of this fall, I'm also teaching at City College, and I'm teaching professional practice to a very large number of students, 26.
So is Anik.
Really? Well,
Yeah,
we need
at
to
the
share
Cooper
tips,
Union.
Anik, because it's a really dense class. It's a lot to cover for one semester. And also teaching to undergrad and grad students at the same time. So they come from different levels of experience and knowledge. So it's interesting.
I can add, I've also kind of recently started the academic endeavors. And my first experience was at Pratt Institute, where I taught a studio focused on, it's called Green Infrastructure Design and Build. So it's an interdisciplinary program where people from diverse backgrounds come together to learn about sustainability and sustainable environments. And so this studio is kind of like the most like design-oriented studio within that interdisciplinary program. And then currently, I'm very excited. I started this semester teaching here at Montana State University, teaching undergrad. This semester planting design studio, which is very different and very cool for me as a learning experience as a somewhat of newcomer to the region. I'm kind of learning together with the students as we go. It's been great.
Abby, do you want to touch on what and where you teach?
Yeah, sure. I teach at Pratt in the undergraduate program. And I typically teach in the thesis sequence. It's a 5-year program, so it's 5th-year students, and it's a seminar in the fall and studio in the spring. That's also co-taught and collaborative. But I'm actually taking a break from that this year, and I'm teaching a seminar this fall on public space and kind of the introduction of form and color to existing public spaces, and building a lot on kind of some of the work that we've been doing with WIP.
So now there's a flux of questions, and maybe going to them in order makes sense.
Yeah, and also I mean, I like to invite, for those of you that are able to turn on your cameras and maybe ask your question in person, by all means, in the spirit of lively discussion, rather than, you know, us reading them out of the chat. We'd love to see your face and kind of hear more from you. And if there's anything that you want to expand on in the question you've written in the chat. I know we've got a question from Erin. If you'd like to, you know, at the very least, unmute yourself if you're not in a position to be on camera. And I know Anik, Nancy, and I'm trying to figure who Eminem is because I don't get the whole names. Let's see.
I'm trying to give some other people a chance to ask their questions before I flood yeah, Kluani, everybody who wants to ask their question, please unmute yourself. But Erin, your question is amazing. Are you there?
Hi, sorry, yes, I'm here. There might be some background noise. Yeah, my question was just, I would love to hear some more about the research on neurodiversity, and maybe if there were some findings that you had that you'd like to implement in your work. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Erin. Thanks so much for coming. I can take that. So there are no official findings of the research project yet, because we're just starting on the neurodiversity, and so there's not a report released yet. However, I think through sort of the explorations that we've done as part of our self-initiated process, which largely consisted of, you know, interviewing different people, different groups of people, self-advocates, and just, you know, people from various backgrounds, and kind of asking, like you've seen, we've showed that slide with sort of this visual research. So like the different groups of different material types of spaces. So we've used that a lot as part of our interviewing process. And so we've just kind of asked people to react, what felt comfortable, uncomfortable, attractive, unwelcoming. And from that, we drew kind of our understanding of the variation in response to all of those things. And I think that kind of created this hypothesis that I mentioned that we've been implementing within our design installations, but by no means it's yet an official kind of result of the research process, is just the importance of choice. And so we've been referring to restorative ground a lot as the landscape of choice. So where it's not a solution that fits all. And one of the things that comes with, you know, accessible design, as we know it for physical accessibility, is that we're trying to make the space so universal and so accessible to everyone that sometimes we're starting to lose the variation, and that in turn makes it not accessible for people who need that variation. So maybe someone wants a little nook, you know, where they can be by themselves because they need a little bit of a calm retreat, but then somebody else really has a lot of energy right now and needs to run around and, you know, jump. And so trying to either create spaces or in some cases provide guidance to how to use existing spaces and how to find a space that's comfortable to you within that existing space, I think is kind of like our current approach and what we learned through this process. I think one really, I'll wrap it up with this one example that we learned from one of the interviews where the person was asked what would be like the best modifications to this existing like stadium for people with autism. And so their response was not actually changes to the physical environment, but creating a guide that people could use to learn what types of spaces exist in that stadium and possibly find a spot that fits their needs. So some people might need a brighter spot, some people might need a darker spot, louder, quieter. And so that idea of choice, I think that's where we are kind of standing right now, but to be, you know, defined and formalized and based on a lot more, it should be based on a lot of more research as we, you know, move on in this process.
I just have a comment on that, if I may. I was just given a book this weekend. It's called Woman Made. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, it's a light blue book from Phaidon. And one of the, I mean, it's full of coffee tables and chairs and objects that women have designed throughout the last 200 years. But one of the objects that stood out for me was a set of cutlery that a Danish woman named Karen Schuh Andersen designed in 1979. And it was specifically designed for people with disabilities who had arthritis or who had multiple sclerosis or a sports injury. And through the design of the redesign of the common knife, changing its shape completely helped those people not put any pressure on their wrist. And it's just amazing to see, you know, how you can use design to change the shape of something and completely make it, you know, a more accessible object. And in a way, I see that your projects are very much like that. At least the thought behind them and the intentionality behind what you're doing at a much larger scale is just so inspiring, because you might find some shapes or some designs that you know are so unique because it's responding to certain needs of people who have you know, disabilities. So it's just it's great to see these parks in the flesh and those ideas come to reality. So really great kudos to you all. It's just so great.
Thank you. Yeah. And just to quickly respond to that, I think one of the key ideas is exactly what you said, learning from things that are already invented, but maybe are just not as present in public realm yet. And so that's why, like, the premise of the research is really learning from people, from the community-based partners and all the expertise that they developed in you know, creating even like furnishings, or I should say just furniture, or devices, or just approaches to things that we could potentially learn from and then bring to public realm.
So I have a question that I don't quite know exactly what the question is, but I know what I want to hear you all talk about, which is how do you catalyze opportunities for yourselves and get the really exciting and dynamic interventions that you're putting into urban spaces to be paying work? You know, how do you, and clearly some of it I can tell is through competitions, but putting those aside, because we all know what those are about, how do you engage clients in such a way that they can take a leap to see what you all obviously see in doing this work, to allow these interventions to come to life, both in the public realm and in buildings that engage the urban fabric, creating the public realm?
Yeah, key paid work is the key term there. Definitely. If we can kind of like pop the hood and like kind of look under the hood of WIP for a second, I'd love to hear from Lindsay, Sonia, and Abby. It's kind of like our business development team. If you have any, you know, insight or anything you want to share about what you've been like developing. Well, I don't know. I don't know that we're as formal as sort of a business development team as you would expect in an office. We kind of joke about calling ourselves that. I think it's important for us to say that we are not currently making enough money through these projects to like support ourselves professionally. As we mentioned, many of us have other practices or teaching, have other means of income, and in a way that's enabled us to be somewhat experimental, to have this large team. But I don't want it to come across as if, you know, yeah, we received a fee for restorative ground that was totally equitable for the amount of time that each of us put into it. It's just not the case. And I think there's a larger theme there that, you know, often work, especially the design of you know, spaces and practices of care is somewhat undervalued. We mentioned that a number of us are involved with nonprofits and volunteer work, which is amazing, but it's often the only way to work in this way, which is also problematic. Mostly there are, you know, majority women doing that kind of work. So there's all these kind of nuances to this that I think we're well aware of and trying to change. We're also really inspired in terms of business model by workers' cooperatives that, you know, are kind of owned and operated by the people who are doing the labor themselves. So predominantly our team is doing all of the work. We've occasionally hired freelance kind of contractors or engaged individuals from our own practices in some of our work. But mostly I think right now is that we're kind of all excited about building this thing and sort of investing in it. The timing also was a big part of it. I don't know if Sonia mentioned, but that neurodiverse research, those interviews, that really kicked the whole thing off. And that was right at the beginning of the pandemic when suddenly a lot of us had time on our hands. We weren't going anywhere, and we, you know, sort of instinctively decided to start doing this kind of work and using this model of Zoom interviews and a Miro board or a virtual whiteboard to have people kind of share their impressions of different kinds of spaces. And that gave us a kind of approach that when we saw the Care for Hudson Square design competition, we knew immediately that we wanted to implement some of this thinking, the ideas of choice in the public realm. But we also, like I said, had just started collaborating virtually. It sort of made everything very efficient, and it was very sort of a happy accident that all of that came together at that point. With Tidal Shift, I think the flip side to
having a large team with a usually small fee for a commission, it's also that you can to some degree share the work, so it's manageable. So, you know, where that project came, they approached us in May for a summer, for a July installation. So we had to design and find someone who could make it and have the materials ready in a matter of weeks. So it was somewhat of a kind of roller coaster, but at the same time, we all, or those of us who were involved in the project, could commit, you know, the amount of time that we had available to make it happen, and you know, in a way, invest again in the future. Since these are public facing projects, they're hopefully kind of building our reputation and creating awareness.
So I have a couple comments I want to throw out in your direction. Things that come to mind are the Arts for Transit program, where the artist, because your work is, you know, it lives not just in architecture, but in public art, or that intersection between space and architecture and public art. And one of our prior speakers, Anne-Marie Baranowski, who spoke, I believe, in our second season, she was formerly the head of the Cultural Facilities Committee at the AIA, and is now practicing on her own, but part of her work has been in implementing arts for transit projects with well-known artists in the New York City transit system. And I think she's doing something now at one of the airports, and she did this amazing installation, supervised its coming to life at the South Ferry #1 train subway station by Doug and Mike Starn, that if nobody here has seen it, or if someone here has not seen it, I would encourage you all to go. It's gorgeous. But also I would think that some of the larger developers like the Rudens and the Vornados and the, you know, the big boys who are doing these mega projects, at some point to gather up the confidence to put your hat in the ring for those things, because they pay money. And
well, we've actually done one project like that, where we were approached by a larger developer and a larger architect to be a kind of consultant for the public realm of their project, which was a model that we also really appreciated. I think it was in a way because it was totally desirable for them to have a smaller practice, a women-led practice, you know, put a human face on their proposal. But we also really enjoyed it. There were a lot of aspects of the project that we, you know, didn't necessarily agree with, but it was great to be brought on with that capacity and be at the table, and bringing our attention, which was to the way the building meets the street and the way, you know, the surrounding community could be engaged by it. So yes, that's like the other typology that we had on one of the slides, but we didn't actually talk through.
Sure. Well, and just to finish up very quickly, I'd be really glad to introduce you to Anne-Marie, who's super lovely and connected in lots of great and relevant ways. And also would encourage you to, if you haven't already, to look into Grace Farms, because they too support this kind of work. And, you know, it's interesting, it's exciting, it's amazing to see how it engages architectural thought and work, and you should be paid for it.
Yeah. Indeed. So I guess we can roll into some more of the questions in the chat if
I have a question. Oh,
Sure.
hi. Hey, sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I do have a question I wanted to ask. My name's Hannah. I apologize, I'm not able to put my video on at the moment, but I'm located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm an interior designer. And I wanted to ask, have your perspectives on design and architecture and equity evolved since each of you joined the WIP Collaborative? And if they have evolved, if anybody wanted to elaborate on that, it would be great to hear how things have shifted since you've been in more of a woman-owned collaborative.
Yeah, maybe I can start off and then pass it on to anyone else who wants to. I'm sure we all have very different perspectives and things that, again, like Lindsay mentioned, having, you know, WIP come to the forefront and like be formed during 2020 is, for me, it's a little hard to like disperse or parse out my emotions and kind of the way that my design thinking and just my personal thoughts have changed during COVID. And then, you know, how WIP has informed that. But personally, I think, you know, just thinking about things in a even more thoughtful way, even, you know, hearing from different from, you know, when we're at the table, well, the Zoom screen, but when we're all together ideating about a project, we really, you know, the non-hierarchical way of thinking is truly is felt when we kind of, all 7 of us are able to share our ideas, and just hearing from different perspectives just helps so much for me in my own practice, thinking about how I could maybe imagine different people thinking about my work and how, you know, something can be done, different processes, and even so many things that are kind of invisible, the invisible labor of even how you think, like design, the design thinking of how you approach a project. So I think just hearing, seeing, you know, 6 other different ways to approach something. Some of them are similar, a lot of them are different. We welcome that. It's just been really helpful to reflect that into my own work. So is there anyone else that wants to expand on Hannah's question?
I think for me, definitely, you know, like thinking about equity has really shifted in that, you know, like I think the way I was seeing it first is that the goal is to design equity, but with this collaboration, I realized that equity is in the process, like throughout the process. Equity is a process more than a result. And goes back to what Sarah was saying. I think that, you know, like I've never been part of a structure that really supports that all voices are heard. You know, like I've been in, as probably some of you, in that position where, you know, like the trifecta of immigrant, woman of color, and you know, puts me in a disadvantage. But I think that, you know, like one thing that I've always tried because of my personal experiences to design for that equity, but also do it in a way that the process itself is equitable. And I think we do that at WIP, where, you know, like we try to bring everybody on board. We try to meet at times that work for everybody. If somebody cannot meet, we just like recap on Slack, make sure that every voice is accounted. We are 7, so we vote, and it always works because there's never a tie. And you know, like thinking about, you know, like the other question that I saw on motherhood, I think that also, you know, like feeling supported, right? Because some of us are mothers, but the ones that are not mother can also be, you know, like feeling motherly sometimes, right? And I think that, you know, like feeling that we are supported and we are equal, and that, you know, like we also contribute in the way that our schedule allows, but also being very transparent about how much we can contribute, and then based on that, how much we get from what we are paid, right? So we have a tier system where if in a given project I wasn't able to contribute the same amount of time, I get a little less money, right? So I think that's what equity, you know, like it means, and you know, like it's been really rewarding. Does anybody wants to add anything else?
I think I have not been part of a collective that was openly called a feminist collective until WIP. And I think for me, I got a lot of exposure to both the challenges that I did not realize before, because maybe I was either sometimes fortunate or sometimes blind to certain things. And then also, yeah, I guess like awareness and exposure to those ideas is something that was at least partially new to me. But then I feel like it really carries now into like the other spheres of life. Since then, I became part of another collective that openly has the word feminist in it, which is a feminist anti-war resistance collective, which was formed in resistance to the war that Russia started in Ukraine. And so I think for me, this word feminist was not really even a thing before, I have to say. And so I think for me, this has been a learning experience, learning from what everybody else has to say from their experiences. This was actually really quite, I can't say life-changing, but quite eye-opening. And so being able to use the tools that have been previously developed through exploration of those concepts, I think enriched me a lot, and hopefully will continue to do so.
Nancy had a question that I think ought to be asked again. Well, she didn't ask it, but she put it in her chat. But her basic question is, how does work find you, or how do you find work? And maybe in that context of a collaborative where it isn't the one, genius mind, it's a hive mind, and you're not saying we are one celebrity, we are a group. Is there a way to attract work or to attract attention that also engages that collaborative idea and changes the way that opportunities come to you, or that you seek opportunities, because it's a different structure and something highly unusual that and kind of defies the conventions of what designers do to get work.
Well, and to follow on just briefly, part of our mission is to make women's work visible. And I would imagine that all of you are constantly thinking, how do we make our work visible if it isn't a public piece that's been constructed in a very obvious location? So, there's that constant challenge of getting one's work to be visible.
Yeah, I think just to jump in while others are thinking, because we're still, just over 2 years in, and we've managed to somehow always have this pace where projects end and then there's like some new opportunity that comes up. I know that personally for me, just as the founder, and I've a little bit more kind of collapsed my independent practice into this. It's pretty nerve-wracking, and it can be definitely uncertain to not really know what the future thing is going to be. But value-driven work is still kind of unique, and it is attractive right now, as the need for this becomes even more loudly kind of stated. So I think that our strategy so far has been always to be very kind of strong about the values that we're bringing to a project, and allow that to be the advertisement, and to sort of not sort of question ourselves in kind of that overt statement. Restorative ground there was a lot of articles published about the kind of interest in neurodiversity, and as Sonia mentioned, we're about to start this whole research and to do it with self-advocates, and we're kind of torn by like, well, I don't know if we can back that up. I wouldn't say that like the majority of users are necessarily people that identify maybe as well, we're all neurodiverse. But at the same time, it's bringing those issues to the foreground that I think is, again, kind of our strong suit, right? And so not claiming to be experts, but claiming to be designers that really focus and center our work around this.
Well, and really
is key.
embedding those issues in the work.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, just to be super clear, I don't mean to challenge, I really mean to do some collective brainstorming, because I know that this type of work, it's exciting, and yet it's very, very difficult to get it into the world. And so to the extent that collective brainstorming is one more arrow in your quiver, you know, there's 25 people on this little screen right now.
Yeah, and actually, you know, as we were preparing for this, we didn't really formally prepare for that, but we always, like, I think in all of our like kind of public speaking situations, we're like interested in, you know, asking people who join us for this meeting or event, like asking them questions. And so I think what you just said, Nancy, is great. So yes, if anybody, instead of a question, has a suggestion or an idea, we would definitely love that. And that's kind of the whole point of collaborative and community, a larger group. But I also just wanted to allude back to something that Lindsay, you mentioned before, the idea of like collaboration versus competition. I think it's also sort of like a marketing tool for us, because we are, instead of all 7 of us, you know, competing for one thing, we're putting our resources together to get that one thing. So, and then we're also open to expanding that group further. So I think that's just another approach that's been, it's just like 7 is more than 1. So 7 times more connections, 7 times more, you know, portfolios. So I think that's just another way that we've been, but possibly attracting, you know, work just through being a larger group that puts our resources together.
Well, you know, twisting things around a little bit, is there a question any of you have to ask of everybody here, perhaps?
Interesting, really putting the moderator on the spot. I'm kidding. I also feel like as moderator, we kind of usually designate one of us and we take turns, and then the moderator always says, that's a great question, and expands on it and then opens it up. So I am going to truly open it up to everybody else while I think of my question.
Yeah, I mean, it's really asking, how can we help you? Or what are you thinking of that we can brainstorm alongside you, or things like that. Although I know there were some additional questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to, in particular about maternity leave and kids. I can't speak to those issues because I don't have any, but I'd love to hear what all of you have to say.
Yeah, Kluani, I know, well, for one, I guess congratulations are in order.
Yeah, exciting and terrifying all at once. Yeah, and I just want to say hi, Sonia. I'm up in Helena, Montana. I went to Montana State, so that was cool.
Nice. So Kluani, Sonia actually works for Love Shack Architecture that we mentioned to you on our call.
Great. We're mostly all women, but we have now added a few guys. So I do appreciate the comment about having equity and hearing all voices, because it's different to come from an all female firm and then add guys in and hear the different perspectives. Yeah, I guess I had 2 questions. One, I have to negotiate maternity leave, yay. And just hearing about maybe any thoughts of how you ladies have balanced life, being moms, but also architecture, because I love it and I don't want to give it up. And then a second question would be if you guys ever do smaller civic projects, because I don't live in a city, but it would be really interesting to hear if you have those in your wheelhouse.
I can start off by addressing the parenting questions, and Abby and Elsa, feel free to jump in, and then maybe the second part of the question, we could speak about a small scale project that we actually worked on for upstate New York. So it was in a less urban, like a small town environment. But yeah, as far as becoming a parent, again, like as I kind of shared, the ideas that eventually led to WIP came out of my own personal experience of exactly what you're going through. At the time, I was already sort of had started my teaching and independent practice career, but was also teaching outside of New York and commuting, and so it was definitely a position that was not going to be sustainable for the long term. And in my independent practice, it wasn't really generating, any financial support. And I felt like I had, decided to become a parent too early. Now, of course, in terms of my age, it was not, but in architecture, we tend to, like other professions, it tends to seem that you need to wait until later in your career once you've established yourself. I went to a talk. I was early in my pregnancy. It was all amazing women leaders in academia, and I remember one of them said, well, I waited until I was tenured to get pregnant. And I thought, well, that's not helpful at all for me, because I was not in that position. So I think for within WIP, the three of us had babies during the process of creating Restorative Ground, which was actually it was like a year that we developed that project. But we were obviously doing other things at the same time. And I think the kind of aspects of the way we work that Elsa mentioned about trying to be very flexible with scheduling and how much time we spend meeting versus working asynchronously, using things like Slack and Miro boards and all these tools that really enable people to be sort of jumping in at different times, and sort of respecting when people need to step away. And I think from what I've seen in working in other institutions, at the schools that I teach and at hopefully in other offices, is that just by vocalizing those needs, even when I returned to teaching, asking where was the lactation room, or if they didn't have one, like where were they going to make it available, and just sort of, again, sort of being value driven in the way we approach everything, and not sort of covering up all of those needs.
Mm-hmm.
I know that also younger practitioners, Bryony and I are working with a younger female-led team in our kind of collaborative teaching about with the kind of reproductive rights studios, and they're also very early in their careers and practice, but they seem to be even more willing to kind of set boundaries, which is great. And one of them even made the comment to me that she'd told a boss, like, my body needs 2 more hours of sleep than yours. Like, I can't work in overtime on this. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, I think like most of us graduated during the recession. We may have like worked in unpaid internships or just like been through the uncertainty of that period of time. And I think like it just exposed so many kind of inequities in these fields that, the more we can sort of reject them, be vocal, and then hopefully, allow it to pass down to
Nice.
to younger people, to empower them.
Yeah.
I don't know, Abby, if you have anything, or Elsa, if you have anything to add about your experience balancing parenthood.
I mean, I think you did a pretty good job describing it. I mean, I think for me, that's like why, even though I have a lot of kind of balls in the air, like, but having like a lot of diversity in what I'm doing and the different types of collaborations that I have, like, does give me the flexibility that I need to step away at certain times. I think maternity leave is a real challenge, and I have 3 kids, and it was a challenge for me every time. And I don't know that I'm the best person to give advice, because I definitely kind of did a mix of like stepping back and working through it, and you know, didn't necessarily like take 3 months off or 6 months off or whatever. But I would say, like, in some ways, even though my youngest is 14 months, I'm still like taking time that I need and able to do that in the flexibility of my schedule. So yeah, I mean, balance is a hard word, but for me, it's like kind of the nimbleness and flexibility and diversity of things that I'm doing, and the fact that, like, yeah, like WIP might be super busy at one certain time, but then not at others, or, you know, stepping back on certain projects, you know, really helps. And like, you know, I'm stepping back a little bit in my teaching this year to focus on practice. So like just being able to kind of like flex, I guess.
Flexible, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share a very unexpected story on maternity leave that I had, that I think is an inspiring experience. And I don't think this is the norm, but I think I aspire that it becomes sort of the norm. And when I became pregnant, I was working as a contractor for a studio in Mexico, led by Tatiana Bilbao. And it's an office that it's medium-sized, but they have international work. And at that point, I was leading the community engagement for the programming phase of a renovation of a cultural center. It's called the Mexican American Cultural Center in Austin. And I was working remotely. The whole office was working remotely. And I think one thing that I knew is that I had the flexibility as a contractor to kind of like set the terms of my leave, because I wasn't really an employee. But nonetheless, I was nervous about the fact that, you know, like you kind of have to hand it off, or, you know, like stop working and announce. And it was, you know, like definitely triggering some anxiety. And I, you know, like didn't want to disturb the process. And that was my first thinking, you know, like I was the lead, and then by me leaving, you know, like everything was gonna fall apart. And, you know, like it didn't, you know, like, and obviously, you know, like it never happens.
Totally.
Like there's always somebody who's gonna support. And I remember when I told Tatiana the news, and she congratulated me, the first thing she said, like, even before you tell me that you're gonna come back, just meet your child first and then plan for it, because you never know what your individual situation is gonna be. Like, we're not gonna negotiate anything right now. Just like have your pregnancy, meet your baby, and once you have your baby and know what kind of baby you have, then we'll talk. And that was amazing. That was an answer that I never expected, but it was nonetheless like something that I'll remember if I'm ever in that position again.
Yeah,
And
that's
congrats
very
for
supportive. Yeah, comment to have. Nice.
Do we want to maybe talk about the other part of your question?
Yeah.
Sarah or Sonia, do you want to talk about Valencia? That was a project that we did almost a couple of years ago, but it was a non-urban project.
Yeah, sure. And, you know, this would be a question that I could ask you, because I'm very interested in non-urban work at the moment, and especially in the region that we both share. So I'd love to talk more about that. But the project that Lindsay mentioned was actually a really great example of collaboration that I keep remembering, even though it was very small. It was a private residence slash coffee shop slash potential Airbnb. But the site was such that it really provided the opportunity for great like interdisciplinary approach to it, because like it was basically located on a slope with one end of the side connecting to a creek, and then the other end connecting to the main street of that small town. And so in a way, that's like the perfect example where you go from, you know, resilient landscape and ecological restoration to public realm with the residents in between. And so I think for us, it was actually a very small, and maybe like 7 people working on this is crazy, but it was a great example of how we each could sort of apply our own like interests, and then it really made this project reach in a way that, you know, maybe not every project gets to, kind of like a little bit luxurious for the project to have so much, you know, so many different voices weigh in. But I'm always thinking of that as, so it is urban in a sense that it's in a small town, but not as, you know, not in like New York City or anything like this. And I think for me, I always like, as someone who's, you know, as a landscape designer, but I've worked in an architectural office when I first started my career, and I've always like struggled a little bit with the, you know, the definition between all of those disciplines, like what is architecture, what is landscape architecture, what's in between. And I feel like that was a good example where you didn't have to choose, and we all had, you know, what we needed to make this happen, and it wasn't about the distinction between those disciplines. And so in my mind, if we can move it to like a larger scale, or even stay at that scale, but maybe do more of those, that's actually a really interesting like line of work. And also for me personally, I was like, especially I think with landscape architecture, there's sort of sometimes this attitude that like private residential design is like not as cool as like public realm design, which I think is like promoted in a lot of schools, and like people come out with this idea. But really, the more I work or even the more I get to know areas outside of big urban centers, like the more importance I see in that work, and especially in landscape component of that work, because suddenly those private properties become not just someone's private property, but they become the fabric that constitutes our environment. And a lot of our wildlife conservation, for example, is happening on private properties right now, just because a lot of the land is private. And so when I kind of twisted that in my own personal head, I kind of got really interested in residential design, which was like a big shift in my thinking. And so hopefully there are ways to, you know, continue, like for us as a collaborative, to do work that is not necessarily the same as the project that I just described, but kind of like along those lines, where all the different disciplines like work nicely together without the need to really distinguish between them as much, but still like using the more specialized tools that each of the disciplines, you know, was able to develop in the past, you know, century.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm just liking this side conversation where Nancy, you live in a town near Valencia, and we were pronouncing it correctly. And so it's technically the post office, and
essentially for official purposes, I live in Valencia.
In
that tiny little town. Uncanny.
Awesome.
Here I am. I'm trying to picture where it is, and I'm guessing it's near Main Street.
It is.
Oh, you have to go to it.
I will. Which building?
Well,
it's not built right now, so yeah. So you won't see anything, yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe also an interesting note to explain like where we were sort of hired by the family that was considering purchasing this plot of land, because they actually asked for like this expanded pre-design sort of feasibility study, which was like, how could we think about this in terms of what we want to do with this for our family, what we also want to do, you know, from an economic perspective, maybe creating a rental, and then how we could contribute to the town. And I think they did purchase it, but I don't know that we know like how much has moved forward in the time that's passed. Although we're still connected to the client.
It's exciting that a private residential client is thinking on that scale.
He worked at Columbia, so he's also like a like-minded person.
Still exciting.
Yes.
I wanted to touch on seeing Melissa, you had a great question, or what you're interested in hearing more about Lindsay's kind of connections, about what Lindsay is doing in your studio with reproductive rights, teaching architecture, and you're saying that there's a connection. Well, maybe I'll let you, instead of just rereading the comment, if you want to expand on what you're interested in.
Do you want me to ask the question out loud?
Yeah.
Yes,
Maybe
please.
she could elaborate. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was super jazzed to hear you talk about the intersection between talking about reproductive rights, abortion, architecture. My personal background, I was a social worker for 21 years before I went into architectural design. So for me, there's no difference between that kind of conversation that you have with folks and how you design spaces to help people with their emotional needs. So I was really happy to hear you talk about that. And I guess I would like to have more information about how you have those conversations and how the intersection occurs.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in this broader kind of ethos of thinking about environments of care, it is quite similar to the other work that we were describing about designing for different sensory and experiential and emotional experiences for different individuals. I think this is part advocacy and normalization. It's not lost on me that I went to Rice in Texas for grad school, and I'm not sure if I'm quite sure that I would not be as comfortable teaching this studio there as here in New York, where all of our institutions are also very supportive of that subject matter. But the studios are all taking a different approach but they're all eventually going to have students design some kind of care facility. It may be sort of abortion healthcare, reproductive healthcare, sexual healthcare, expanding to really consider a lot of different forms of care that are really threatened right now, hormone therapy, contraception, fertility treatments, all of that. But it's also, connecting, especially students. This is an advanced undergraduate studio. So, undergraduates in their 4th and 5th year. And it's probably the most political I've been, although all of my teaching has a very kind of political ethos to it. We're talking about, senators and what they're putting on the table and what have you read in the news today. And, also, do we realize that at the end of this semester, when you're presenting your final projects, like the situation could be different